Hello, church. It's so good to be with you. Just a couple of quick shout outs after a really productive ministry weekend. Just a shout out to Pastor Ryan and to Jay Johnson, our men's ministry director, for their launch of Men to Men on Friday night. Just a great turnout of men. I'm super excited about what God's going to do with men in our church. And just a real big thank you to all those that served and participated, and literally to Jay's entire team that has been preparing for a year to launch this ministry. And of course, it's also pumpkin patch season. So big shout out to everybody who signed up to serve, who helped us unload pumpkins, and just all the good things that are happening with that. So, all right, so we're in the book of Philippians. We've just finished Paul's salutation. Everything seems good. It's a happy letter, right? I want to remind us that Paul's letter to the Philippians is probably a response either to an oral, verbal kind of communication that came with a messenger, but more likely a message that came in the form of a letter. And so we need to know that Paul now begins to respond to some things that are happening back in the church that he loves so much. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 1, verse 12. Paul says this: "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice." All right, so there's really two parts happening here. First of all, word comes to the Philippian church that Paul's in prison, he's in chains. They're distraught, they're trying to figure out what happens. Surely this cannot be the reward for everything Paul has done. Paul's done everything God has asked him, he's done everything right, and then all of a sudden his reward is jail? Like, that doesn't make any sense. That's like no cognitive dissonance comes from that this just can't be the facts. This can't be the way it linearly works out. But yet this is where we find ourselves. Paul's in jail. This is a reality for him. And so part of what we want to understand is that everything's looking up and right in the ministry with Paul. He's planting churches. Things are great. He's planted this church, and then he finds himself imprisoned and in chains. And what's crazy to me is that we have the ability to look back, but the Philippian church really did not have that. New Gentiles to the faith. Everything they know about Jesus, they learned from Paul. But what we find is this is the same story. It's the gospel. Jesus, when he is arrested and crucified, was in the middle of probably the most successful part of his ministry. It was up and to the right. It was moving in a great direction. But Paul wants to say is, listen, do not let your circumstances define who you are, right? You've got to fight against your circumstances. That you've got to really renounce any kind of victimhood. You have to release any type of entitlement. You have to embrace the fact that God uses everything. He wastes nothing. Did you hear that, church? God wastes nothing. God will use the circumstances that you're currently in. So here's what happens. You put Paul in prison, you put Jesus in prison with him. And if you put Jesus in prison, what have you done? You've placed the gospel in prison. Isn't that what Paul said? He says, listen, I want you to know what has happened to me has only served to advance the gospel. This is a good thing, he says. We don't see it as a good thing, but he sees it as a good thing because he won't be defined by his circumstances. His bad circumstances is nothing more than an invitation to have Jesus and the gospel inserted into those circumstances. Now, secondly, we find that something else is going on here, and we are not going to be surprised by this. It appears that there are some pastors or some people, some churchy people back home in Philippi that are stirring up some trouble over Paul being in prison. Like they're trying to leverage that for their own gain, right? That they're, people have a tendency to do that. They wish ill will upon their competition or ill will upon people that have hurt them. And they try to leverage somebody else's trouble for their own gain and glory. We see this happen in the world all the time. I just remind you this morning that church is not a competition. We are confident in who we are as a church, and we're moving forward with mission and vision that God has specifically given Georgianna and our church. Now, there's possible a church down the road, it's got a different mission and vision. But we're not focused on their mission and vision. We're focused on the one that God gave us. And so that's ultimately what Paul says, isn't it? He says, listen, he says, if the gospel's being advanced, I don't care. He says, don't let those troublemakers stir up trouble for you all, because it's not troubling me, he says. So some just great points here. He's just not allowing the circumstances of A, being in prison to thwart the advancement of the gospel, or B, what's happening back home in the church of Philippi to cause trouble for those who are literally preaching the gospel from right motives. He says, stay the course. You do the right thing. And at the end of the day, you will see God glorified and you will be edified. It's not more complicated than that. Do the right thing. Don't be defined by your circumstances, church. And so as you move about this week, just try to keep in mind that everything that you encounter is an opportunity for Jesus and the gospel to be inserted into it, and then see what he does with that. I love you so much. I pray this has been a blessing to you today as we unpack the stories and rich scriptures of the Bible. I love you, and we'll see you soon. Take care.